In the heart of Seoul, they call Kang Du-suk the architect of shadows, a man who doesn't kill with bullets, but with land deeds and zoning laws. When Melinda, a brilliant Kenyan architect, is recruited to redesign a massive urban district, she thinks she's finally building her masterpiece. She's wrong. She's unknowingly sketching a target over the financial heart of Du-suk's illegal empire. The moment she uncovers a dead zone in the blueprints, a secret vault disguised as a subway foundation, the air in her office turns cold. Du-suk doesn't send hitmen, he sends a car. You have two choices, Melinda, he whispers, his voice like velvet over a blade, as he shows her a live feed of her family back in Kenya. You can walk away and watch your world burn, or you can stay and belong to me, body, mind, and soul. Choose now, your family, or me. Melinda does the unthinkable. She smiles, looks him in the eye, and chooses him. But as she picks up her pen to redraw his empire, a dark secret flickers in her gaze. She hasn't surrendered. She's just realized that the best way to destroy a fortress is to be the one who designed the walls. The golden sky over Seoul was a deceptive masterpiece. From the 34th floor of her new office, Melinda watched the city breathe, her mind tracing the geometric perfection of the skyline. Just 3 months ago, she was a rising star in Nairobi, known for creating sustainable structures that defied the heat. Now, she was the lead architect for the Gilded District renewal. She thought she was here to build a legacy, she didn't know she was here to bury a crime. The project had seemed like a dream until she found the gap. It was a 4-meter discrepancy between the city's official land surveys and the construction blueprints she had been handed. On paper, it was a structural support pillar. In reality, it was a hollowed-out artery that ran straight into the basement of the National Bank. A mistake, her supervisor had whispered, his face turning an ashy gray when she pointed it out. Forget you saw it, Melinda. Some things in Seoul are built to stay hidden. But Melinda didn't forget. She dug deeper, tracing the shell companies tied to the permits. Every road led back to a single name, Kang Du-suk. He wasn't the kind of man you found in the tabloids. He was the man who owned the tabloids. He was a legal tycoon who controlled the city's pulse through the very concrete she was pouring. The realization hit her like a physical blow, but the true terror began when she returned to her apartment that night. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and cold rain. Standing by her floor-to-ceiling window was a man whose presence seemed to swallow the light. Kang Du-suk didn't look like a monster, he looked like a king in a tailored suit, watching the city he had built. The Kenyan government just flagged your father's business for an audit, Du-suk said, his voice a calm, terrifying rumble. He didn't turn around. And your sister's student visa for London? It was revoked 10 minutes ago. A clerical error, I'm sure. Melinda's blood turned to ice. She dropped her bag, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Why? She managed to gasp. He finally turned. His eyes weren't filled with rage, they were filled with a dark, intellectual curiosity. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away, his shadow looming over her. You saw the gap. Most would have ignored it. You mapped it. That makes you either my greatest liability or my most valuable asset. He reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline with a touch that was both a caress and a threat. I don't kill talent, Melinda. I harness it. But I need total, unwavering loyalty. If you leave this room, your family's lives will crumble before your plane touches down in Nairobi. If you stay, you design the future of my empire. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. Choose now, Melinda. Your family, or me. The silence in the room was deafening. Melinda looked at the man who had her life in his hands, then at her drafting table across the room. She felt the weight of her family's safety on one side and her soul on the other. Slowly, she took a shaky breath and looked him in the eye. I choose you, she whispered. Du-suk smiled, a slow, triumphant look of a man who had just won a war. But as he turned to pour 2 glasses of wine to celebrate her surrender, Melinda's gaze shifted to the blueprints on her table. She had lied. She hadn't just found a gap in his vault, she had found a structural flaw in his entire foundation. As she reached for the glass he offered, her hand was steady. She wasn't his prisoner. She was the only person who knew exactly which brick to pull to make his whole world come screaming down. The penthouse was a palace of glass and cold marble, floating high above the glowing veins of Seoul. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Melinda could see her construction site, a massive skeletal structure of steel that was supposed to be her masterpiece. On the mahogany dining table lay a sleek, obsidian, black card. Do-suk had told her it had no limit. He had given her the keys to the city, the power to hire anyone, and a wardrobe of silk and gold. But as Melinda walked through the silent, echoing rooms, the luxury didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a funeral. Every bouquet of lilies smelled like a graveyard, and the air was so still it made her skin itch. She retreated to her new home office, hoping to lose herself in the blueprints of the gilded district. The desk was a marvel of modern tech, a smooth, dark surface that felt warm to the touch. As she sat down, a faint blue light hummed beneath the wood. Melinda ignored it, trying to focus on the gap she had discovered in the foundation. But as she thought about the secret vault, her heart began to race with anxiety. Suddenly, the wall in front of her flickered. A digital readout appeared in soft white numbers, displaying a heart rate of 110 beats per minute. Melinda froze. She looked down at the desk and noticed tiny, microscopic metal pads where her palms rested. She pulled her hands away, but the display changed again. A high-resolution scan of her own eye appeared on the wall, showing her pupils dilating in real time. The realization hit her like a plunge into ice water. This wasn't just a high-tech office, the entire room was a biological sensor. The walls weren't just walls, they were ears. The desk wasn't just furniture, it was a lie detector. Do-suk wasn't waiting for her to tell him her secrets, he was reading them directly from her blood and her eyes. Every time she felt a spark of rebellion or a flicker of fear, he was watching the data on a screen somewhere else, smiling at her lack of control. Terrified, Melinda reached for the only thing that felt real, a framed photo of her parents and sister back in Kenya. She gripped the silver frame, seeking comfort in their smiles. But as the light caught the glass at a sharp angle, she saw a tiny, dark glint. She looked closer, her breath catching in her throat. Deep inside the pupils of her father's photographed eyes, a microscopic camera lens stared back at her. She wasn't his architect, and she wasn't his partner. She was a specimen in a high-tech cage, and he was watching her even when she looked at the people she loved. The next morning, Melinda tried to keep her face a mask of stone. She knew the walls were watching the twitch of her lips and the sweat on her palms. She spent hours hunched over her construction contracts, her eyes scanning the legal jargon for a loophole, any exit strategy that would let her fly back to Nairobi without Do-suk destroying her family. But the contracts were a spiderweb, every clause tied her deeper to the project, and every exit led to a massive financial penalty that would bankrupt her father's business in an afternoon. That evening, Do-suk insisted she accompany him to a high-society gala. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos. Do-suk stayed by her side, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He introduced her as the visionary who was redefining Seoul's skyline. To the world, they looked like a power couple, but to Melinda, his hand felt like a shackle. When Do-suk stepped away to speak with a government official, a man with graying hair and a nervous twitch approached her. He was a rival developer, someone Do-suk had outbid a dozen times. He leaned in, pretending to admire her diamond necklace. "You're brave to take this job, Melinda," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the orchestra. "The man who held your desk before you, Thomas, was just as brilliant. Do-suk told us he retired to a villa in Italy. But Thomas hated the sun. He would never leave his work behind. Melinda felt a chill run down her spine. He, retired? She asked, her voice trembling. He disappeared, the man hissed before slipping back into the crowd. The moment the blueprints for that vault were finalized, Thomas stopped answering his phone. His house was emptied in a single night. He didn't retire, girl. He was erased. Melinda didn't wait for Dusuk to return. She claimed she had a headache and hurried back to the penthouse. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she sat at her high-tech desk. She remembered Thomas's name from the old project files. If he was erased, he would have left a sign. She began feeling under the edges of the heavy mahogany drawers, her fingers searching for anything out of place. She found it, a tiny, hidden latch at the very back of the bottom drawer. With a click, a secret compartment popped open. Inside lay a plastic ID badge with a picture of a smiling man named Thomas. But the smile was hidden behind something dark and terrifying. A single, thick, reddish-brown smudge covered the bottom of the card. It was a dry, old fingerprint made of blood. Melinda stared at it, the realization hitting her. The gap she was building wasn't just a vault, it was a tomb, and she was the next person scheduled to fill it. The smell of wet concrete and diesel exhaust hung heavy over the construction site. Melinda stood on the observation deck, her hard hat pulled low as she watched the massive cranes swing like prehistoric birds. Suddenly, a sound like a lightning strike echoed through the pit. A massive support beam on the lower level groaned, bending under the weight of the freshly poured floor above. Dust erupted into the air, and screams rose from the workers below who were trapped in the collapse zone. Melinda's hands flew to her radio. Sector 4 is buckling. Stop the pour. Evacuate the lower levels now. Negative, architect, a cold voice crackled back through the headset. It was Dusuk's chief of security. The boss says the concrete must set. If we stop now, we lose 3 days and $5 million. Let the men finish. Melinda looked down. She could see the workers scrambling, their faces pale with terror as the ceiling above them began to rain debris. If she did nothing, dozens of men would be crushed to save a billionaire's schedule. If she acted, she was openly defying the man who held her family's life in his hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't hesitate. She bypassed the security channel and slammed the emergency siren on the control panel. Everyone out, she screamed into the site-wide intercom. This is a structural failure. Evacuate immediately. The workers dropped their tools and ran. Seconds after the last man cleared the zone, the entire sector pancaked. Tons of steel and concrete came crashing down in a roar of thunder, sending a cloud of gray dust rolling over the deck. Melinda stood shaking, her lungs burning. She expected Dusuk to appear in a rage, ready to strike her for the lost millions. Instead, he walked slowly out of the shadows of the crane, clapping his hands with a slow, rhythmic beat. He wasn't angry, he looked disappointed. You have a gift for architecture, Melinda, but you have a weakness for blood, he said calmly. He gestured to the wreckage. That wasn't a structural failure. I had my team cut the bolts an hour ago. I didn't care about the building, and I certainly didn't care about the 5 million. The realization hit Melinda like a physical blow. The accident had been staged. He had purposefully put those men in danger just to see if she would value his profit over their lives. She had failed his test of coldness. Dusuk reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, matte black pistol. The metal looked ice-cold in the dim construction lights. He walked over and pressed the weapon into Melinda's trembling palm, forcing her fingers to curl around the grip. You think you're a hero because you saved those men, but in my world, mercy is just a slow way to die, he whispered into her ear. You're too soft for this city, Melinda. But don't worry. By tonight, you'll be the one pulling the trigger. The weight of the pistol was still a ghost-cold pressure against Melinda's palm as she locked herself in the penthouse bathroom. She turned the shower on full blast, hoping the steam and the roar of the water would mask her movements. Using a burner phone she had scavenged from a construction locker, her fingers trembled as she dialed a familiar Nairobi number. Every ring felt like a heartbeat. "Hello?" Her sister Imani's voice crackled through the line. "Imani, listen to me," Melinda whispered, her voice sharp with desperation. "You need to take Mom and Dad and leave the house right now. Don't pack, don't tell anyone. Just go to the village. There is a man here, Kang Du-suk, he is dangerous. He is using me, and he's going to hurt you to keep me under his thumb." There was a long silence on the other end. Melinda expected panic or crying. Instead, she heard a soft, confused laugh. "Melinda, what are you talking about?" Imani asked. Her tone wasn't fearful, it was glowing. "Mr. Kang is a saint. Why would we run from a man who saved our lives?" Melinda's heart skipped a beat. "Saved you? Imani, he's a criminal. He's a monster. A monster doesn't pay for Dad's heart surgery at the best hospital in South Africa," Imani countered, her voice growing firm. "A monster doesn't send a wire transfer for $5 million to clear the family debts and buy us the estate in Karen. He called us himself, Melinda. He told us how much he admires your work. He said he wanted to make sure the family of his most brilliant partner never suffered again." Melinda leaned against the cold tile wall, her head spinning. Du-suk hadn't just threatened her family, he had bought their souls. He had turned himself into their savior, wrapping them in a blanket of blood-stained gold. To them, Melinda wasn't a captive, she was a success story. "Imani, you don't understand," Melinda pleaded, tears stinging her eyes. "That money, it's a leash. He's controlling me through you. You're just stressed, big sister," Imani said, her voice now cold and dismissive. "You always think the worst of people. Mr. Kang told us you might get overwhelmed. He said to tell you he's taking care of everything so you can focus on building the future. We are safe, Melinda. For the first time in our lives, we are powerful. Don't ruin this for us." The line went dead. Melinda stared at the phone in the foggy mirror. She realized with a sickening jolt that she was completely alone. The man who sat in the office next door had built a prison so perfect that even the people she was trying to protect had become the guards. Her family wasn't waiting to be rescued, they were now Du-suk's most loyal supporters. She was the only person left who knew the truth, and in their eyes, she was the villain. Melinda stopped fighting the current. If the world wanted her to be Du-suk's partner, she would play the part perfectly. She dried her tears, walked out of the bathroom, and sat at her drafting table. For 3 days, she worked without sleep. She wasn't just drawing walls anymore, she was designing the Infinity Vault, a digital and physical fortress meant to hold Du-suk's secret financial ledger. To Du-suk, it looked like she was finally submitting. To Melinda, it was the construction of a Trojan horse. Deep inside the vault's digital security system, she hit a kill switch. It was a tiny piece of code disguised as a fire safety protocol. If she activated it, every encrypted file in Du-suk's empire would be erased instantly. His bank accounts would vanish, his property deeds would be deleted, and his legal front would crumble. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, late into the night, burying the virus under layers of complex architectural math. The room was silent except for the soft click of her keys. Then, a shadow fell across her screen. Melinda's heart leaped into her throat, but she didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the code, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "The logic in line 42 is messy," a deep voice rumbled behind her. Du-suk was standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his suit. He leaned over her, staring at the screen where her kill switch was half hidden. Melinda felt her blood turn to ice. She waited for him to call the guards, to drag her away, or to use that heavy black pistol. Instead, he reached out and pointed a long, steady finger at a block of text. If you leave the script like that, the server's firewall will catch the loop in 3 seconds. You need to wrap it in a secondary encryption. Like this. He reached over her hand, his fingers moving the mouse with terrifying precision. He wasn't stopping her, he was fixing her virus. Melinda stared at him, her mouth agape. You know what this is? I know everything that happens in my house, Melinda, Dusuk said, his voice strangely calm, almost bored. He looked down at her, his dark eyes reflecting the blue light of the monitor. I told you I admire your mind. A mind that doesn't try to kill its captor isn't a mind worth owning. I want you to try to destroy me. It makes the game much more interesting. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and the scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco filled her senses. He reached out and typed a final, secret string of characters into the vault's master key. There, he whispered against her ear, his voice a low, vibrating hum. I've given you the password to my heart, Melinda. The vault is ready. Now, let's see if you actually have the courage to stop it. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the penthouse, blurring the neon lights of Seoul into streaks of red and blue. For the first time, the silence between Melinda and Dusuk didn't feel like a battle. They sat on the balcony, the city lights reflecting in their wine glasses. Dusuk looked away from the skyline, his usual mask of cold power slipping. He began to speak about his father, a man who had traded his son's childhood for power, forcing Dusuk to commit his first crime before he was even a teenager. You think I built this empire because I love it, Dusuk said, his voice unusually soft. I built it because I was a pawn in a game I never asked to play. My father turned me into a weapon, then locked me in a room made of gold. Just like you, Melinda, I was an architect of a prison I had to live in. Melinda looked at him, startled. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes and realized that beneath the expensive suits and the terrifying reputation, he was just as trapped as she was. For a heartbeat, her hatred softened into something else, a dangerous flicker of empathy. They were both prisoners of their own brilliance, two lonely people standing on top of a world they didn't want. She reached out, her hand hovering near his, and for a second, the tension was no longer about life or death. It was about two souls finally seeing each other. But just as their fingers were about to touch, a sharp, piercing alarm echoed through the penthouse. Melinda's laptop on the nearby table glowed a violent, pulsing red. The kill switch, she whispered, her face turning pale. It's been activated. I haven't touched it, Dusuk said, his eyes narrowing as he snapped back into a predator's focus. Melinda scrambled to the screen. The code she had written was being executed, but not by her. Someone had hacked into her private server, using her own digital signature to drain Dusuk's secondary accounts. It was a setup. Someone was using her Trojan horse to steal from the Mafia and leave her holding the smoking gun. I didn't do this, she cried out, but the words were drowned out by the thunderous sound of a battering ram hitting the front door. The heavy oak doors splintered and flew open. A dozen tactical police officers flooded the room, their red laser sights dancing across the walls. Dusuk stood still, his hands raised in a mocking gesture of surrender, but the officers didn't even look at him. They swarmed around Melinda, pinning her arms behind her back. Melinda Kalu, the lead officer shouted over the chaos. You are under arrest for international corporate espionage and the theft of state-level financial data. We have a warrant for your immediate extradition. Melinda looked at Dusuk, begging him to say something, but he just watched her with a cold, unreadable expression. As they dragged her toward the door, she realized the trap wasn't just a cage, it was a cage with no floor, and she had just fallen through. The police transport van never made it to the station. A black SUV slammed into its side, sending Melinda spinning into the metal walls. Before the sirens could stop wailing, the doors were ripped open by men in masks. They didn't speak, they simply grabbed Melinda and threw her into the back of their vehicle. When the blindfold was finally removed, she found herself in a damp, concrete basement. Standing before her was a man who looked like a crueler, younger version of Do-suk. This was Kang Min-ho, the brother who lived in the shadows of the empire. "My brother is getting weak," Min-ho spat, pacing the room like a caged animal. "He's obsessed with you. He thinks you are a partner, but I know you are just a key. You built the Infinity Vault. You have the codes to the Black Ledger. Give them to me, and I'll let you live long enough to see me burn his world down." Melinda's hands were tied to a wooden chair, but her mind was already calculating the dimensions of the room. She noticed the low ceiling and the heavy, industrial vents hummed above them. Min-ho pulled out a phone and dialed his brother. He put it on speaker, holding it close to Melinda's face. "I have your architect, brother," Min-ho laughed. "The police think she's a fugitive, but she's right here. If you want her back in one piece, send the master codes for the ledger. You have 10 minutes. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Do-suk's voice came through, sounding disturbingly calm. "You always were a fool, Min-ho. You think you've captured a prize, but you've only invited a disaster into your house. I'm not paying a cent. You see, Melinda is an architect. She doesn't just build rooms, she builds traps. You aren't holding her, she's holding you." Min-ho's face turned a violent shade of red. "He's bluffing. He doesn't care about you." He grabbed Melinda by the throat, his eyes bulging. "The codes. Give them to me now." Melinda didn't flinch. In the dim light, she actually smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that made Min-ho pause. "Do-suk is right about one thing," she whispered, her voice steady. "I've been watching the air pressure in this room since I arrived. This safe house was built by your brother's firm, but I'm the one who updated the ventilation software last week." She tilted her head toward the humming vents. "I didn't just build a vault for his money, Min-ho. I built a vacuum system for his enemies. I just sent the command from the smartwatch you forgot to take off my wrist." As she spoke, the humming grew into a deafening roar. The heavy steel doors hissed shut, locking with a magnetic thud. The air in the room began to thin, pulled out by the massive fans above. "I didn't build a vault," Melinda said, her voice dropping as Min-ho began to gasp for breath. "I built a vacuum." The vacuum system had done its job. As Min-ho and his men slumped to the floor, unconscious from the lack of oxygen, Melinda used a hidden blade from her sleeve to saw through her zip ties. She stumbled out of the safe house and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. She didn't run to the police. She didn't run to the airport. She went straight back to the penthouse to confront the man who had let her be kidnapped. She found Do-suk standing in the center of the darkened office, staring at the blueprints for the Gilded District. Melinda slammed her hands onto the table, her eyes burning with rage. "You let him take me. You almost let me die just to prove a point," she screamed. "And I know why. It isn't about the money or the ledger. I found the truth in the ventilation code of this building." She pointed to the gap on the blueprint. "This isn't a vault for money. It's a pressurized tank connected to the air vents of the entire city hall next door. You aren't building a bank, you're building a gas chamber. You're going to kill the entire political council at the inauguration, aren't you?" Do-suk looked at her, his face pale and hollow. He didn't look like a villain, he looked like a man who was drowning. "I didn't design that, Melinda," he whispered. "I tried to stop it. That's why I hired you. I hoped a brilliant architect like you would find a way to redesign the foundation so the tanks couldn't be installed. I was trying to sabotage my own family." "Then who?" Melinda gasped. "Who would be so cruel?" The sound of soft, rhythmic clicking filled the room. The door opened, and a tiny, elderly woman walked in. She was dressed in a traditional silk dress, her white hair tied in a perfect bun. She looked like a sweet grandmother, but her eyes were as cold as a winter morning in the mountains. This was Du-suk's mother. "My son has always been too soft for the family business," the woman said, her voice sweet and terrifying. "He thinks he can play at being a king without getting his hands bloody. But I am the one who kept this empire standing while his father was weak. I am the architect of our survival, Melinda. You were just the tool I used to make the building look pretty while I hid the poison inside." Melinda stepped back, her heart freezing. The true monster wasn't the man she had been fighting, it was the woman who had been watching from the shadows. The mother walked to the table and dropped a smartphone onto the blueprints. The screen was lit up with a live video feed. Melinda's breath hitched. It was a construction site in Nairobi, the very one her sister, Imani, had been bragging about. The camera zoomed in to show Imani tied to a steel pillar, with a hooded man holding a blowtorch just inches from her face. "One breath for the politicians in Seoul," the mother whispered, "or one final breath for your sister. Choose wisely, architect." Melinda looked at the screen where her sister was trembling, and then she looked into the cold, dead eyes of the mother. She knew she couldn't win by fighting with her fists. She had to fight with her mind. She took a slow, deep breath and nodded. "Fine," Melinda whispered, her voice sounding defeated. "I'll do it. I'll finish the gas system. Just don't hurt Imani." The mother smiled, a terrifying expression that didn't reach her eyes. "A wise choice, child. Get to work." For the next 6 hours, Melinda stayed glued to the control terminal. To the mother, it looked like she was perfectly aligning the gas vents to target the city hall. But Melinda was actually using her ghost architect skills to rewrite the building's entire internal map. She wasn't just connecting pipes, she was rerouting the building's lungs. She worked with feverish speed, creating a loop that would bypass the city hall entirely. Instead, the gas would be forced through the underground tunnels that led directly into the Mafia's private safe rooms and the mother's secret headquarters. Du-suk stood in a corner, watching her every move. He was a master of strategy, and he noticed the subtle changes she was making to the pressure valves. He realized what she was doing. If she succeeded, she would wipe out his entire family and their empire in one breath. He walked over to her, his shadow falling over the screen. "You're sending it back to us," he murmured, so low that only she could hear. Melinda didn't stop typing. "They have my sister, Du-suk. Your mother is a monster. I am ending this. If you do this, she will kill you before the gas even reaches the basement," Du-suk warned. "Then let her try," Melinda snapped. Suddenly, the mother stepped forward, sensing the tension. "Is it ready?" she demanded. Melinda's hand hovered over the enter key. The system was live. The gas was primed. At that moment, Du-suk pulled his heavy black pistol from his jacket. The mother gasped, reaching for her own small weapon hidden in her sleeve, but she was too slow. Du-suk stepped between the two women, his face a mask of agony. He was a man torn in half. He looked at his mother, the woman who had raised him in a world of blood, and then at Melinda, the woman who had finally shown him a way out of his golden prison. "Du-suk, put that down and kill her," the mother screamed. "She is destroying everything we built." The alarm began to blare, a high-pitched scream that echoed through the penthouse. The digital timer on the wall turned a bright, angry red, counting down the final moments before the valves opened. Du-suk's hand shook. He pointed the gun at his mother's heart, then swung it toward Melinda, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then he swung it back to his mother. 10, the computer voice announced. 9. 8. Du-suk's eyes were filled with tears as he looked at Melinda one last time. He had to choose between his blood and his heart, and the clock was screaming. The countdown reached 0, and the penthouse exploded into chaos. Du-suk didn't shoot Melinda, he fired a warning shot into the ceiling and grabbed her by the arm, shielding her as his mother's guards burst through the doors. The Gilded District had become a war zone. Gunfire echoed through the halls of a half-finished skyscraper, sparks flying from exposed wires. Dusuk dragged Melinda toward the emergency stairs, his body acting as a human shield. "We have to get to the central hub," he shouted over the roar of the alarms. "It's the only way to stop the gas and the purge." As they sprinted through the skeletal hallways of the 50th floor, Melinda's face was set in a grim expression. They reached the massive server room that acted as the building's brain. Dusuk stood by the door, firing back at the approaching syndicate soldiers, while Melinda frantically typed into the main console. "I have to delete the ledger," she cried out. "If I erase the financial data, your mother loses the proof she needs to blackmail the city." "Do it!" Dusuk yelled, ducking as a hail of bullets shattered the glass windows behind them. "But you don't understand the price," Melinda screamed back. Her eyes were fixed on the screen as she initiated the final command. "I didn't just build a building, Dusuk. I built a living machine. I gave this skyscraper a structural heartbeat. The support pistons in the foundation are controlled by the digital ledger. If the data is wiped, the heartbeat stops. The pistons will retract." Dusuk froze, his eyes widening. "You mean the building will fall?" "It won't fall," Melinda said, her voice trembling. "It will settle. But everything inside will be crushed." She slammed her hand onto the execute key. A deep, low hum vibrated through the floor, the sound of a giant heart stopping. But before the data could finish wiping, a stray bullet whistled through the air and slammed into the center of the main server. The machine hissed, smoke pouring out of the circuits. The screen went black, and the software glitched. Suddenly, the floor beneath them lurched violently. A sound like 1,000 bones breaking echoed up from the foundation. The skyscraper groaned, tilting at a terrifying angle toward the street below. "The system is crashing," Melinda shrieked, grabbing onto a metal railing as the world turned sideways. A massive steel support beam, jarred loose by the tilt, came crashing down from the ceiling. Dusuk shoved Melinda out of the way just in time, but he couldn't move fast enough. The heavy beam slammed onto his legs, pinning him to the tilting floor. Melinda scrambled toward him, but the building gave another violent shudder. The floor began to slide out from under them, and through the shattered windows, the city of Seoul seemed to be rising up to swallow them whole. The skyscraper groaned like a dying giant, the floor tilting so steeply that Melinda had to claw at the carpet to reach Dusuk. He lay pinned under the massive steel beam, his face pale with pain as the glass windows shattered into a million glittering diamonds. Melinda grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from an emergency kit and jammed it under the beam. With a scream of pure desperation, she threw all her weight onto the bar. The steel groaned, shifted just an inch, and Dusuk scrambled free, his legs bruised but unbroken. "You saved me," he wheezed, leaning against her as the building continued to tilt. "Now we have to get out before the foundation gives way." "Not yet," Melinda said, her voice turning cold and sharp. She dragged him toward the backup terminal near the elevator shafts. "You asked me to choose between my family and you. You wanted me to belong to your world. But I've decided to build a new one." She began typing with lightning speed. Dusuk watched, his eyes widening as he realized she wasn't just erasing his files. She was using the building's own high-speed satellite link to bypass the Mafia's firewalls. "What are you doing?" he gasped. "That's my entire legal fortune. Everything my family has built for 50 years. I'm giving you exactly what you wanted, Dusuk," Melinda said, her eyes fixed on the flickering screen. "I'm giving you my loyalty by destroying the monsters who made you. And I'm giving you your destruction by making you a common man." With one final keystroke, she executed the both plan. The twist wasn't a bomb or a collapse, it was a redistribution. In real time, the screen showed billions of dollars flowing out of Dusuk's accounts. The money didn't disappear into thin air. It was being funneled into thousands of small bank accounts, belonging to the families in Seoul whose homes had been stolen for this project, and the struggling farmers in Kenya whose land had been poisoned by Mafia shell companies. "It's gone," Dusuk whispered, watching his empire vanish into the hands of the people he had stepped on. "I have nothing." "You have your life," Melinda countered. The sound of police sirens and helicopters drowned out the groaning of the steel. Blue and red lights flashed against the dusty walls. The building had stopped tilting, settling into a permanent, broken angle. Melinda reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound folder. Inside was a fake passport and a one-way ticket to a remote corner of the world. She shoved the passport into his hand as the heavy boots of the tactical police echoed in the stairwell. She looked him in the eye, her expression a mix of pity and triumph. "The police are coming for the architect of shadows," she said as the door began to buckle. "You have 10 seconds to decide. You can stay here and go to jail as a king without a kingdom, or you can take this and live as a ghost with absolutely nothing. Choose now, Dusuk." The orange sun dipped low over the Nairobi skyline, casting long, peaceful shadows across Melinda's new studio. A year had passed since the glass towers of Seoul almost became her tomb. Now, Melinda was no longer a captive, she was a global icon. Her name was synonymous with courage, and her designs were celebrated for their beauty and honesty. Her family was safe, living in a home built on true honor, and her father's name had been cleared of every false charge. She was finally free, breathing the sweet, warm air of a life she had reclaimed with her own mind. She sat at her desk, looking over a mysterious delivery that had arrived that morning. It was a thick roll of heavy vellum, tied with a simple leather cord. As she unrolled the papers, her breath hitched. They were blueprints for a new orphanage to be built in the rural highlands. The design was breathtaking. It featured the wide, open spaces and natural ventilation of her Kenyan roots, but the structural core had a cold, mathematical precision that she knew all too well. It was a perfect blend of two different worlds, a style that only two people in the world truly understood. Melinda traced the lines of the foundation with her trembling fingers. There were no hidden vaults here. There were no gaps or secret gas vents. It was a building designed for protection and light. She realized then that Dusuk hadn't just disappeared into the shadows of the world. He had been watching, learning, and perhaps, for the first time in his life, building something that wasn't a prison. The night air grew cool, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the open balcony doors. Melinda stood up, her heart drumming a steady, familiar rhythm against her ribs. She stepped out onto the terrace, looking down at the quiet street below. In the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a man stood perfectly still. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or expensive silk. He wore the dusty, rugged clothes of a common laborer, and his hands looked calloused from hard work. But when he looked up, the moonlight caught his gaze. Those dark, piercing eyes were unmistakable. He had followed her across the world, not as a king, but as a ghost seeking a home. Melinda gripped the stone railing, her voice barely a whisper in the African night, yet it carried the weight of everything they had survived together. She looked down at the man who had once tried to own her, and who now stood before her with nothing but his own two hands. "I gave you your family back, Dusuk," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Now, give me mine."